the first speaker, Professor Joydeep Dutta. Some of you very briefly have been introduced in the morning when we went for the visit to Engine Lab at RDSO. So Datta is essentially a mathematician who was a professor at IIT Kanpur till recently, till 2014, and then continues there as a professor in mass economics. He has major interest on locomotive history as such, and also has published one book, The Story of Indian Alco Locomotives. So I request Professor Datta to present your talk.
So it is largely a techno-historical talk, the story of Indian Alco locomotives, where Alco, as you know, stands for American Locomotive Company. If you dim the light, I will show you that the locomotive that I show here is not really an Alco one. It is a narrow gauge Indian locomotive taken at Nainpur Junction, a very important narrow gauge hub built by CLW, the rival of DLW. Diesel locomotives were really needed because you needed to haul heavy freight like coal trains because of the growth of industries post-independence. If someone gives a little thought, one would notice that the whole line starting up from Dhanbad or maybe Asansol up down to Ghaziabad is actually India's coal road. It actually is for hauling coal trains, and that is why you are not talking about this dedicated freight corridor. So one of the first locomotives which came to India was WDM-1. This is the DL500 World Series locomotives which was developed by Alco from their famous FA and PA class locomotives. And this has the class 244 Alco diesel engine with 12 cylinders, which we had just seen in the RDSO test bed. The interesting thing is that 100 locomotives of this type which came to India, 17,000 to 17,099. Only one survives in cannibalized condition in the National Railway Museum, for which I had myself given a lot of effort. The locomotives had only one cab, so they needed turning like a steam locomotive. Their speed, maximum capable speed, was 105 kilometers per hour, and in fact they brought in the first passenger dieselization. In 1965, it hauled the first dieselized Howrah-Kalka mail from Howrah. So one of the very early dieselization, but the main job was to haul coal trains. So the first locomotive shed for WDM-1 was made in Gaya, which was removed when that section was electrified. So though WDM-2 is the legendary locomotive of which most of you have seen, but you don't see the name WDM-2 anymore, you see WDM-3A, because on the numbers you see the number R. So what happens is that here I have given the background pictures of an electric locomotive, and this is the traction with which our diesel locomotives are fighting a rear guard action. WDM-2 was the first hood type locomotive. If you observe, the locomotives have two hoods, one long hood and one short hood. The short hood contains the braking equipment, including the dynamic brake grid, radiator grids, and also the long hood contains the traction generator or the alternator, the prime mover, the 251B or 251C engine, the compressor exhauster unit. Exhauster unit was required to create vacuum. In the old days we had vacuum operated braking system, which is no longer there, so exhausters are no longer used. Radiator cooling fans, lube oil filter, engine oil, fuel oil filter, and so on and so forth. Many other components. I have just written down some of the components here. So there was a short hood and a long hood and a cab in between. This was a standard design, but this design was not really an Alco design. This design was essentially a General Motors design by Richard Dilworth, who brought in the first hood design GP7, GP9 locomotives in US. The interesting fact about this locomotive, WDM-2, is that though it is of a lower quality in technology to WDM-4, which came from General Motors, and Indian Railways wanted to have a TOT from them, but they didn't agree. That the story is that they didn't agree. I have another story. I know there are some railway people sitting there, so I will not tell the story. I know another story which I shouldn't, you can ask me in person. So the GM was almost on the verge of agreeing, but then something happened and Alco got the thing. But what is the great thing about having Alco locomotives in India? The great thing was that at that time we did not have huge amount of money. Our economic condition was not good that we could take lots of locomotives from a captive seller. We took a more simpler technology, but we could build them indigenously, understand them completely, and the WDM2 line actually standardized the way diesel operations are done in the country. And unbelievably, WDM2, in spite of all said and done, if you take a historical view at it, it is the most reliable locomotive in India ever. I don't know if there are some railway people, they can agree or disagree, but to me, as I have studied, that is the most reliable locomotive Indian Railways have ever produced. Electric traction people might not agree, that's a different issue, but you see, locomotives was numbered in the series 18, 17 and 16. So the first locomotive was 18040, which was built in Alco, and then they sent kits to DLW, which was established in 1962, and Mr. Satya Chakravarti was the first general manager of DLW. And in that thing, they assembled the kits. So one such assembled kits was 18233, and that was the first kit assembled, and Mr. Lal Bahadur Shastri, our Prime Minister, inaugurated in 3rd of January 1964, and the last one was manufactured in August 1988, 16887. Sorry, I think 1998. There's an interesting website called irfca.org. Many of railway people would know it, many who are interested about the railway history would know it. It's a collection of people like us who have formed and put pictures, history and all these things about the railways. There's a very good interactive session about the WDM2. So this is the WDM2 locomotive. This is like the last type Century class locomotives of the Alco company. The biggest problem of this locomotive was this asymmetric wheel set, the Alco Coco tri-mount bogies. And they created a lot of damage on the tracks. And that was one of the reasons why, apart from the superb technology which General Motors was giving and the other things, Alco had a huge hauling power. There was a saying in US railroads that they can possibly haul the yard office out of the yard. They had such hauling power. They were really, and WDM2 actually represents that. This locomotive overall, if you ride a WDM2 at a slower speed, you can feel the hunting. The suspensions are not very good. And here I show inside kindly with due permission from the railway people, please don't complain about my name. This is a picture of the cab. Indian Railways are very much, they don't want pictures to be taken, and I had to face a lot of flack, and doesn't matter. So this is a picture of the WDM2, original WDM2 cab. Now this is a DLW built locomotive, but this is exactly the layout at which Alco had built. Today we speak about ergonomics for locomotive drivers. Look into the ergonomics that they had at that time. This part, this is tested by the Association of American Railroad. This part is completely the pneumatic part. These are the pneumatic gauges. This is a brake pipe, brake cylinder, main reservoir, equalizing reservoir, the vacuum gauge, the HS4 pressure, and so on and so forth. And these are the two brakes. This is for the train, it's called the A9, and this for only the locomotive, called the SA9. Here you see the train brake is in the release position, and SA9, the locomotive brake, is in the applied position. This was a light locomotive from which the picture was taken. And this is a throttle by which the driver starts accelerating the train. If you observe, this part is the electrical part of the operation. So they have clearly divided the whole thing into two parts, electrical part and the pneumatic part. And if you observe, if you sit here and if you are driving, if there is any problem, your hand will immediately go to the brakes. Brakes are right in front of you. Your hands would act like this. So nowadays, in name of ergonomics, dex type designs are being built and rebuilt, rebuilt locomotives are being put in many WDM2s. Even the sheds are rebuilding the things, but they are really no match to this design. And I strongly support this particular design. So this is the short hood phase, and this is the long hood phase. And many children, I am quite fond of children, and I try to encourage them to see the railways. And this is, people are quite amused with this one. So this is the thing to put the multiple unit cable. I can tell you how to start and drive a WDM to what I shouldn't. So this is something, is a forgotten hero. We never bother about the meter gauge, possibly because we went to do the broad gauge. Today you must have seen the 6-cylinder bed, 6 inline locomotive, 6-cylinder engine. That was the engine of DL251D engine, which is a 6 inline engine built for this Alco locomotive, the meter gauge one. This YDM4, Y stands for meter gauge, WDM2 means W stands for broad gauge, D stands for diesel, M stands for mixed traffic. You can do both mail, express and freight. This is Y stands for meter gauge, it remains same. This locomotive, this is not really YDM4, but this locomotive was amazing that in the meter gauge, it could pull pretty long trains and also do very fast operations. So some locomotives were built by Alco, some by MLW, which still remains as Bombardier with us, and another is DLW who started building these locomotives. But like the improvements that they did on the broad gauge locomotives, nobody bothered about this loco, and this is truly a forgotten hero. Only few days ago, just to go to a friend's wedding in Badayu, I chose to travel purposefully by the Nainital Express to take a last meter gauge run behind the YDM4. It performed amazingly well. And the train was at least having 15 to 16 coach load, and it is still pulling. It's such an old locomotive.
What is Y? What is the
Y means meter gauge. It's a narrow gauge. Narrow gauge has two types, 2 feet 6 inches and 2 feet. 2 feet 6 inches given the symbol Z, and 2 feet is given the symbol N. So there are salient features of YDM4. I had just made a. So some of these locomotives hauled fantastic trains like Vaigai Express, Pink City Express, and that they did it at 100 kilometers per hour. Though they were initially made for only 96 kilometers per hour with a gear ratio 92:19 gear pinion ratio, but they could actually be re-geared a little bit, especially the ones which came from MLW, which were called YDM4A, and they hauled trains like Vaigai Express and Pink City Express at 100 kilometers per hour. The Pink Cities were faster than possibly Shatabdi between Delhi and Jaipur. Almost took the same time or slightly less, and the modern broad gauge avatar of Vaigai Express does much worse with electric traction than it did with diesel traction. I've traveled by Vaigai during the meter gauge days. It was just fantastic. And meter gauge, by the way, had a culture. That culture is completely lost now. Meter gauge had a culture, their locomotive maintenance, etc. Everything had a culture. And these locomotives, WDM2 had two driving stands. Driver always sat on the right. But YDM4, there was only one driving stand. When it was short hood, driver sitting in the right. When it was long hood, driver is sitting in the left. Now what Alco started to do, Alco started to improve the 251B prime mover in the 60s to make it 251C, which we did it much later, and locomotive was trialed out with a newer 3100 class engine, 3100 HP engine at Lucknow here itself, and that delivered a braking horsepower of 2750 HP. So the first such locomotive with a 251C prime mover was named WDM2C, and it was named Gajraj. And then there was it was modified to make WDM3A. Now this is WDG2. The first freight version was also made, taking the ideas from WDM3A. But the important part of this WDG revolution is that they changed completely the wheel set. The wheel set was a high adhesion bogie, which did not create problems on the track, and that is where the Indian Railway Research is actually putting in. They had taken the object and then really thoroughly studied the Alco diesel locomotives. I think Alco actually lives on in our railways, which is amazing, and I really want to congratulate the railways for taking this approach of not getting caught with some foreign distributor who will distribute the engine and you have nothing to do. You have to be their slaves. That was the plus point. So this locomotive is seen everywhere. They are even hauling passenger trains, mail express trains to very tough gradients. Say between Pune and Belgaum, they will haul very important expresses. So later on, a passenger version was created, which was in the nickname Pushpak by myself and my co-author in this book, S.M. Sharma. And in fact, at the day when this loco was trialed at 160 kilometers per hour, I was present in his room at TKD. The driver came from Golden Rock Workshop, a South Indian, and he was told that you should take a trial of this locomotive at 160 kilometers per hour between Delhi and Mathura, in Palwal and Mathura, and it did well. It is still the power for the Rajdhani Express, Kerala Rajdhani till Baroda. Now the last series of the Alcos made by DLW is the WDM 3D, and they have taken a lot of features inspired from the new generation of EMD locos. See, EMD lost to GE in the competition in US because the GE -9, -8 locomotives completely put EMD under problem. So EMD had now no choice but to accept for technology transfer, which they didn't accept in 1960s. So they accepted technology transfer now. Once they accepted technology transfer, so they gave in their superior quality locomotive. Actually, what is our WDG4 here, or GT46 PAC, is a rather made up version of SD70 MAC. It's where you have AC traction motors. Obviously, you have an alternator instead of a DC generator. But instead of traction motors, are also three-phase asynchronous traction motors, which are used in these locomotives. They are state of the art. They have very good hauling power, and they are of course doing excellent. They are possibly taking over most of the diesel duties, and people enthusiasts started to call them diesel god. But this last of these Alcos, WDM 3D, though they wanted the 3D actually means WDM is WDM, 3 is 3000, and D is combined means 3400 horsepower. But in actual practice, it only gives you 3300 horsepower. There have been repeated attempts by RDSO to build higher horsepower locomotives going to 3500, 3600, WDM 3E, WDM 3F. But ultimately, everything is derated. 1 or 2 copies are built of those prototypes. Ultimately, the 251 prime mover is limiting, and possibly we have to somehow realize this situation, that we now have to get into some other technology. One interesting thing I would like to end, there is a new locomotive in the block, only 2 are made, 80,000 and 80,001. They are called WDM2G. They have 3 generator sets, each of 800 HP, each can give 800 HP. So totally they have put 2400 HP on the rails, and they have standard DC traction motors just like WDM2. But the build of the WDM2G looks as if you are standing in front of a SD40 locomotive in the US. It's completely very, very American looking locomotive. First time I have seen such a locomotive built in the Indian Railways. But WDM 3D is possibly the DLW or even RDSOs, because we are here doing the things with RDSOs, most successful built Alco. I call them in my book the new Alcos from Varanasi. They are Alcos, their base is Alco, but they are all coming out from Varanasi. So what Indian Railway did, they had actually honed the complete technology of WDM2 very well. For example, a very important development was the development of the tightening clip. You see this, I'll just show you. You see these running plates here. In Southeastern Railway there was an accident, these plates came off. When Neelachal Express was moving towards Puri, the plates came off and the train got derailed at speed. So then they developed a screw which was so well done that, and there has been a lot of development in the whole structure of the bogie itself. Now these bogies have been taken by electric traction. For example, WAM4, WAG5, they all run on these tractions. And diesel has contributed to the development of and growth of the mechanical aspects of electric locomotives. If you look at this WAP4 locomotive, which is this one, which hauls Rajdhanis and many other prestigious trains. If you look at the bogie of this, the wheel set, it is exactly the wheel set of the WDM4 that we bought from General Motors. So diesel has a lot of contribution, and Alco's, I think India has really refined Alco to a stage where Alcos can be still a very important class of motive power. But I think with WDM 3D, I believe that the limit is actually reached. WDM 3Ds are a fabulous locomotive doing a fabulous job, but I think the limit is reached. That's my opinion, could be wrong. So here is my book. I would end the talk by showing you my book, The Story of Indian Alco Locomotives, The Legend of the WDM2. It's published by the National Railway Museum, written with my friend Sachin Sharma, who was director diesel traction 1 or 2 years ago. Now he's in Baroda, in the National Railway Academy or the Railway Staff College, Baroda. He's a faculty there. So we plan to write something about EMD locomotives in the future. So, any questions?
Thank you, Professor Dutta. If there are any questions.
Can I ask what the Juvenile line is? Not what the line.
That is a A line. No, that's a narrow gauge line. Z class locomotive, ZDM3, ZDM4 that they operate there, just like the Kalka Shimla line.
Now, why did they do 2.5 and then 3 feet?
Kangra Valley Railway.
But why did they choose a?
But it's better to take curves.
No, but between 2.2 and 3, there is not a big difference.
2.6 and 2. Oh, 3.3 meter gauge. That's very difficult. Local Maharajas would have built. It is much more cheaper to build the tracks. For example, Baroda Maharaj, Gaikwad of Baroda, he has he had a huge network around Baroda, around Dhaboi, a place called Dhaboi. They were all built to 2 feet 6 inch gauges. Nobody can question. Gwalior Maharaj, Sindhias, had a huge fabulous narrow gauge network around Gwalior. They all built to 2 feet 6 inch gauges because they were cheapest thing to do. Sindhias had a train bringing them inside the palace.
So those are cheaper basically.
That's why. Yeah, but I think the Alco story should actually end with WDM 3D. We should actually switch over to other better modes.
Anyone has questions, please? If there are no questions, let us thank Professor Dutta for his very good speech.